Brady Williams froze mid-step, his weathered hand tightening on Bruno's leash as the 180-pound black bear suddenly erupted into a frenzy of barks and claws at Denver International Airport's Carousel 7. The orange Suitcase sat innocently among hundreds of others, but Bruno's reaction was unlike anything Brady had witnessed in their 3 years together. This wasn't a drug alert or explosive detection. This was pure, desperate panic. Security alarms blared as passengers scattered, children screaming, luggage tumbling across the polished floor in the chaos. TSA agents shouted orders while bomb squad techs rushed toward the scene, but Brady's eyes remained fixed on his four-legged partner, who now whimpered and pawed frantically at the unmarked case. The old park ranger's arthritic fingers trembled as he remembered Ethan's final words 3 years ago. "Promise me you'll save them, Dad." Inside that suitcase, something was scratching. Something alive. Something dying. "Clear the terminal now!" echoed through the speakers as Brady faced an impossible choice between protocol and a promise he'd failed to keep once before. What was Bruno trying to tell him, and how much time did they have left? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years ago, Brady Williams had been a different man. At 62, he'd spent 4 decades as a Colorado park ranger, his calloused hands as familiar with mountain trails as they were with the weight of responsibility that came with protecting both wildlife and visitors. Life had been predictable then, until that devastating September morning when his 16-year-old son Ethan fell during what should have been a routine climbing expedition near Anchorage, Alaska. The accident had shattered more than Brady's heart. Medical bills from Ethan's 3-day hospital stay before he passed had drained his modest savings, forcing him to take early retirement and accept a part-time security position at Denver International Airport. At 65, Brady now lived paycheck to paycheck in a cramped apartment, his arthritis a constant reminder that his body was failing him just as he'd failed his son. But Ethan's death had brought an unexpected blessing. 2 months after the funeral, while hiking the memorial trail they'd planned to tackle together, Brady discovered a terrified bear cub whose mother had been killed by poachers. The orphaned animal was barely 8 weeks old, trembling and malnourished, with soulful brown eyes that reminded Brady painfully of his son's. Bruno had been his salvation. Through 18 months of legal battles, veterinary bills Brady couldn't afford, and specialized training that consumed his entire retirement fund, the bear had become more than a companion. He was family. Brady had mortgaged his future to obtain the rare federal permit, allowing Bruno to work as a detection animal, one of only 3 bears certified for airport security in the United States. Their bond was extraordinary, forged through mutual loss and desperate need. Bruno seemed to understand Brady's grief, often placing a gentle paw on his shoulder during the old man's darkest moments. In return, Brady had given the bear purpose, training him to detect explosives and narcotics with an accuracy rate that amazed federal inspectors. The arrangement worked for everyone, almost. Airport Supervisor Johnson tolerated Bruno because his detection record was flawless, though he frequently complained about the liability. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the overworked airport veterinarian, had become an ally, providing Bruno's medical care at cost, and often waiving fees she knew Brady couldn't pay. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, the 72-year-old cafeteria manager who'd lost her husband 5 years earlier, had adopted both Brady and Bruno as the grandchildren she'd never had, sneaking them free meals and offering a sympathetic ear. But financial pressure was constant. Bruno consumed 40 pounds of specialized diet weekly, costing more than Brady's grocery budget. Veterinary care, liability insurance, and the modified apartment that housed a bear stretched his pension beyond breaking point. Some nights Brady lay awake wondering if he was being selfish keeping Bruno when a sanctuary might provide better care. Yet every morning, When Bruno's warm breath nudged him awake and those intelligent eyes met his own, Brady knew they needed each other. They were two broken souls who'd found healing in an unlikely partnership, proving that family wasn't always about blood. Sometimes it was about choosing to save each other. The chaos at Carousel 7 had transformed Denver International Airport into a scene from Brady's worst nightmares. As TSA agents barked orders through megaphones and passengers fled in panic, Brady found himself transported back to that terrible morning in Alaska when everything had gone wrong. The orange suitcase, the same vivid color as Ethan's climbing gear, seemed to mock him from its position on the slowly rotating conveyor belt. "Williams, get that animal under control." Supervisor Johnson's voice cut through the din as he approached with two security guards. Johnson had never liked the arrangement with Bruno, viewing the bear as a liability waiting to happen. "We've got bomb squad protocols to follow here." But Brady couldn't tear his attention away from Bruno's behavior. In 3 years of partnership, he'd never seen anything like this. The bear's hackles were raised, his massive frame trembling with agitation as he alternated between deep, mournful barks and high-pitched whines that seemed almost human. It was the sound of desperation, of recognition, of something Brady couldn't quite understand but felt in his bones. "Sir, we need you to move back immediately." A bomb technician in full protective gear approached, his voice muffled by the helmet. "We're treating this as a potential explosive device until we can clear the area." "Bruno doesn't alert to explosives like this," Brady insisted, his arthritic fingers struggling to maintain grip on the leash as the bear strained toward the suitcase. "This is different. He's trying to tell us something." The scratching sound came again, faint but unmistakable from inside the case. Brady's trained ear, honed by decades in the wilderness, recognized it wasn't mechanical. This was organic, rhythmic, desperate. Something alive was trapped in there, and whatever it was, Bruno knew it intimately. Dr. Sarah Martinez appeared at Brady's elbow, her practical ponytail slightly disheveled from rushing across the airport. As the facility's wildlife veterinarian, she'd been called in to assess Bruno's unusual behavior. "Talk to me, Brady. What's he telling you?" "I don't know," Brady admitted, watching as Bruno began pawing at the air, his claws extended in a gesture that looked almost like he was trying to dig. "But look at his body language. This isn't aggression or fear. It's recognition, like he knows what's in there." Martinez studied the bear with professional intensity. "The way he's positioning himself, it's protective behavior, maternal almost." She paused, considering. "Brady, when did you say you found Bruno?" "September, 3 years ago, up near Anchorage." The words caught in Brady's throat as the connection hit him like a physical blow. That suitcase came from Anchorage. The implications sent ice through his veins. The luggage tag showed Alaska Airlines Flight 447 from Ted Stevens International Airport, the same airport Ethan had flown into for their planned climbing expedition, the same place where everything had gone wrong. Mrs. Henderson appeared with her characteristic determination, pushing through the security perimeter with a coffee tray and the authority of someone who'd worked at the airport longer than most people had been alive. "Brady, honey, you look like you've seen a ghost. Here, drink this." She pressed a steaming cup into his trembling hands. "Dorothy, they want to treat this as a bomb threat," Brady said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But Bruno's telling us something else entirely." The elderly woman studied the bear with the wisdom of someone who'd raised 6 children and buried a husband. "That animal's never been wrong about anything important, has he? Sometimes we old folks know things the young ones haven't learned yet." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, "including what rules are worth breaking." Agent Lisa Collins materialized beside them, her airport coordinator badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. Something about her presence had always struck Brady as slightly off-kilter, too observant, too knowledgeable about flight patterns and cargo manifests for someone in logistics. "The passenger manifest shows this bag belongs to a John Smith," she said quietly. "Paid cash for the ticket, no contact information on file." "Fake name," Brady said immediately. "Who travels with cash anymore?" "My thoughts exactly." Collins's eyes met his with an intensity that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. "Brady, how long can they keep that case in quarantine before opening it?" "Federal protocol requires 72 hours unless there's immediate threat to public safety," Johnson interrupted, having overheard. "We're not cracking it open because your bear got excited." But Bruno's whining had taken on a new quality. Urgent, pleading, heartbroken. The sound reminded Brady of the noise Ethan used to make as a baby when he was hungry and couldn't understand why no one was helping him. It was the sound of a creature trying to communicate something vital across the species barrier. As the scratching from inside the suitcase grew weaker, Brady made a decision that would change everything. Whatever was in there was running out of time, and he'd already failed to save one innocent life. He wasn't about to let it happen again. The next 18 hours stretched like an eternity for Brady Williams. While airport security maintained their perimeter around the orange suitcase, he couldn't bring himself to leave Carousel 7. Bruno had settled into a protective crouch beside the conveyor belt, his intelligent eyes never leaving the case as soft whimpers escaped his throat at regular intervals. The sound broke Brady's heart. It reminded him too much of the vigil he'd kept beside Ethan's hospital bed, watching his son fight a battle he couldn't win. "You should go home, get some rest," Dr. Martinez suggested as dawn light began filtering through the airport's massive windows. She'd stayed through the night as well, officially monitoring Bruno's behavior but really providing moral support to a man she'd grown to respect over the past year. "I can watch him." Brady shook his head, wincing as the movement aggravated the arthritis in his neck. "He's trying to tell me something important. I failed to listen once before. I won't make that mistake again." The reference to Ethan hung unspoken between them. Dr. Martinez had heard the story during one of Bruno's routine checkups, how Brady's son had been acting strangely in the days before the climbing trip, mentioning bad men he'd seen near the wildlife areas, begging his father to call the authorities. Brady had dismissed it as teenage imagination, focused instead on the expensive gear he'd purchased for their father-son adventure. "Brady," Dr. Martinez said gently, "whatever happened to Ethan wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" His voice carried 3 years of guilt. "He tried to tell me something was wrong up there. Said he'd seen men with cages, heard animals crying. I told him he was watching too many nature documentaries." Brady's weathered hands clenched into fists. "If I'd listened, maybe he wouldn't have gone off alone to investigate. Maybe he'd still be alive." As if sensing his human's distress, Bruno lifted his massive head and placed it on Brady's lap, offering the same comfort he'd provided countless times before. The gesture didn't go unnoticed by Agent Collins, who'd been observing from a discreet distance while maintaining her cover as airport logistics coordinator. "The manifest shows some irregularities," Collins announced, approaching with a tablet in hand. "This suitcase was checked through 3 different airports: Anchorage to Seattle, Seattle to Denver, with an original departure from a private airstrip in rural Alaska." She paused, studying Brady's reaction. "The timing coincides with a period when several wildlife protection officers went missing in that region." Brady's blood ran cold. Missing? 3 federal agents investigating reports of illegal wildlife trafficking. They were last seen near the same area where... Collins let the sentence hang, but Brady understood. "Where Ethan died." The words came out as barely a whisper. Mrs. Henderson had arrived with breakfast, her matronly presence a comforting constant in the chaos. "Oh, honey," she said, setting down a thermos of coffee and homemade biscuits. You look like death warmed over. When's the last time you ate something?" "Can't eat," Brady replied, though he accepted the coffee gratefully. Not while something in that case might be dying. The elderly woman studied Bruno with the practical wisdom of someone who'd raised 6 children. "That bear's been trying to dig all night. Look at his paws. He's actually worn grooves in the floor." She pointed to the scratches Bruno's claws had left on the polished concrete. "My late husband was a hunting guide up in Montana. He always said animals know things we can't see." As if responding to her words, Bruno suddenly stood and began a new behavior, a rhythmic pawing motion that looked almost like he was trying to open something. "Doctor." Martinez watched with professional fascination. "That's not random movement," she observed. "It's too deliberate, too purposeful. Brady, has he ever done anything like this before?" "Only once," Brady said slowly, memory crystallizing. "When we first found each other. He kept pawing at a fallen log, trying to show me something underneath." The recollection sent shivers down his spine. There were 2 other cubs, trapped under there, dead, probably his siblings. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Dr. Martinez pulled out her phone, scrolling through wildlife databases. "Brady, if Bruno's siblings were killed by traffickers 3 years ago, and this suitcase contains bears," Collins finished, her professional mask slipping slightly. "The scratching sounds, Bruno's recognition behavior, the Alaska connection, it all fits." Supervisor Johnson chose that moment to make his rounds, his disapproval evident in every line of his body. "Williams, you've been here 14 hours. This is becoming a problem. That animal needs to be removed from the premises." "No." The word came out with more force than Brady had intended. "Bruno stays." "This isn't a negotiation," Johnson's voice rose. "Federal protocols. Screw the protocols." Brady's outburst echoed through the terminal, drawing stares from early morning travelers. "Something alive is in that case, and every hour we wait increases the chance it dies. I've lost enough for 1 lifetime." The scratching sound from inside the suitcase had grown weaker overnight, more sporadic. Whatever was trapped inside was losing strength, and Brady could see his own helplessness reflected in Bruno's increasingly desperate behavior. The bear had begun making soft huffing sounds, almost like he was trying to communicate across the barrier separating him from the case's contents. "There has to be something we can do, Doctor," Martinez said, her veterinary instincts overriding caution. "If there are animals in there, every hour matters. Dehydration alone could kill them." Agent Collins stepped closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "There might be a way to expedite the process. Officially, I can't recommend anything that violates federal protocol. Unofficially," she glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard, "sometimes maintenance issues require immediate attention to prevent contamination of the baggage system." Brady understood immediately. "You're talking about breaking the law." "I'm talking about saving lives," Collins replied. "The question is, how much are you willing to risk?" At 11:47 p.m. on the second night, Brady Williams made the decision that would define the rest of his life. The airport had quieted to its overnight hum, with only essential personnel and red-eye passengers moving through the dimly lit corridors. Supervisor Johnson had gone home hours earlier, leaving the night shift supervisor, a younger man named Martinez, who'd always shown respect for Brady's experience, in charge. "I need 20 minutes, Brady whispered to Agent Collins as they stood in the shadows near Carousel 7. Bruno hadn't moved from his protective position beside the orange suitcase, his breathing synchronized with the increasingly weak scratching sounds from within. "Can you make that happen?" Collins nodded, her fingers already working on her tablet. "Maintenance alert for potential biohazard leak in baggage system. That'll clear the area and give us cover." She paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Brady, if this goes wrong, I can't protect you. My position here depends on maintaining cover. I understand. Brady's weathered hands trembled slightly as he pulled on the disposable gloves Dr. Martinez had provided. But I can't watch something die when I have the power to help. Not again. Dr. Martinez had arrived with a veterinary emergency kit, her usual professional composure masking deep anxiety. If there are animals in there, they'll likely be in severe distress, dehydration, malnutrition, possibly injured from the transport. She checked her supplies one final time. We need to be prepared for anything. Mrs. Henderson surprised them all by appearing with a cart of cleaning supplies, her silver hair tucked under a maintenance cap. You boys aren't the only ones who can bend rules when it matters. I've been working this airport longer than anyone. Security doesn't question the night cleaning crew. The unlikely team moved with quiet efficiency. Collins activated the biohazard alert, immediately triggering protocols that evacuated the area and suspended all surveillance in the contaminated zone. Mrs. Henderson positioned her cart to block sight lines from the main concourse while Dr. Martinez prepared her medical equipment. Brady approached the suitcase with Bruno close beside him, the bear's entire body quivering with anticipation. "Easy, boy," Brady murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to help them now." The case was secured with a TSA-approved lock, but Brady's ranger training included basic security bypass techniques. His arthritic fingers worked slowly but steadily, muscle memory guiding him through the process while his heart hammered against his ribs. The lock clicked open with a soft snick that seemed to echo through the terminal. Brady lifted the lid, and the smell hit them immediately. A pungent mixture of urine, feces, fear, and something indefinably wild that transported him back to his early days as a park ranger. But it was Bruno's reaction that confirmed their worst fears. The bear let out a sound Brady had never heard before, a deep, mournful keen that seemed to come from his very soul. "Oh my God," Dr. Martinez whispered. Inside the suitcase, nestled in soiled straw and shredded newspaper, lay 3 bear cubs. They were American black bears, probably 8 to 10 weeks old, barely alive. Their eyes were closed, their tiny rib cages rising and falling with labored breathing. One appeared smaller than the others, its breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. "They're alive," Brady said, his voice breaking. "Barely, but they're alive." Bruno immediately pressed closer, his nose working frantically as he took in the scent of the cubs. His behavior was unmistakable. These weren't just any bears. Dr. Martinez began her examination with practiced efficiency, but Brady could see the horror in her professional assessment. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and hypothermia," she reported quietly. "The smallest one is critical. They've been in transport for days, maybe longer." She gently lifted the first cub, a female with distinctive white markings on her chest. "This little girl is the strongest, but that's not saying much." Brady reached for the second cub, a male slightly larger than his sister, feeling the frail body trembling beneath his touch. "How long do they have?" "Without immediate intervention, hours, maybe less for the smallest one." Dr. Martinez was already preparing IV fluids. "We need to get them to my clinic immediately." But as Brady lifted the third and smallest cub, memories flooded back with crushing force. The tiny bear's labored breathing, the way his small body fought for each breath, was exactly like Ethan's final hours in the Anchorage hospital. Brady found himself transported back to that sterile room, watching his son struggle while feeling utterly helpless. "Dad," Ethan had whispered during one of his lucid moments, "promise me something. Promise me you'll save them." Brady had thought his delirious son was talking about other climbers, about mountain rescue. Now, holding this dying cub in his hands, he realized Ethan had been trying to tell him about something much larger. much more important. Bruno's behavior confirmed what Brady's heart already knew. The bear approached each cub with gentle sniffs, his body language expressing both recognition and grief. These weren't strangers, they were family. Bruno's siblings, separated during the same trafficking operation that had claimed their mother and left him orphaned. "We're getting them out of here," Brady said with quiet determination. "Right now." Mrs. Henderson had already prepared a route through the service corridors, her decades of airport experience proving invaluable. "Laundry cart," she announced, producing clean towels and blankets. "Nobody questions an old woman doing her job." Dr. Martinez worked quickly to stabilize the cubs for transport, inserting tiny IV lines and wrapping them in warming blankets. The smallest cub barely responded to her ministrations, his breathing growing increasingly erratic. "This one might not make it to the clinic," she said honestly. "His body temperature is dangerously low and his blood sugar is probably crashed." "Then we'll warm him here," Brady said, unzipping his security jacket and pulling the tiny cub against his chest. The warmth of human skin-to-skin contact was a basic wilderness survival technique he'd learned decades ago. "Come on, little fighter." "Stay with us." As they prepared to move, Agent Collins provided crucial intelligence. "I've been tracking the Suitcase's route. It originated from a private airstrip in the Kenai Peninsula, the same area where 3 federal wildlife officers disappeared 3 years ago." She paused, her expression grim. "Brady, I think your son stumbled onto something bigger than anyone realized." The implications sent chills through the group. The timeline matched perfectly. Ethan's death, the missing federal agents, Bruno's orphaning, and now these cubs. They weren't dealing with random wildlife trafficking. This was an organized operation that had been running for years. "Who's behind it?" Brady asked, though part of him already suspected the answer would be someone with enough power and connections to have evaded federal investigation for this long. "That's what I've been trying to determine," Collins replied. "But whoever it is has resources, political connections, and absolutely no conscience about killing anyone who gets in their way." The journey to Dr. Martinez's clinic through the airport's maze of service corridors felt like the longest walk of Brady's life. Bruno padded silently beside them, his eyes never leaving the cubs in the laundry cart. The smallest cub, whom Brady had privately named Courage, remained pressed against his chest, the tiny heartbeat fluttering like a trapped bird. Mrs. Henderson proved to be an invaluable ally, her authoritative presence and genuine concern for her boys, clearing their path through areas where questions might have been asked. Security cameras were mysteriously offline in several key corridors, and elevator access codes appeared when needed. "How are you managing all this?" Brady asked as they reached the veterinary clinic. The elderly woman smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd spent a lifetime solving problems. "Honey, when you've been taking care of people as long as I have, you learn that sometimes the rules are guidelines and sometimes they're obstacles. Tonight, they're obstacles." Dr. Martinez's clinic was a small but well-equipped facility tucked away in the airport's administrative wing. Designed primarily for quarantine procedures and basic veterinary care for service animals, it had everything needed for emergency treatment. As she began setting up intensive care equipment, Brady continued skin-to-skin warming with Courage, while Bruno maintained his vigil. "The other two are responding to fluids," Dr. Martinez reported, her professional calm masking deep emotional investment. "Heart rates are stabilizing and their body temperatures are coming up slowly." But Courage remained critically unstable. His breathing was shallow and irregular, his tiny body occasionally shuddering with what Brady recognized as micro-seizures. Each tremor sent Brady back to Ethan's bedside, watching his son's body fight battles it couldn't win. "Is there anything else we can do?" Brady asked, his voice raw with emotion. "We're doing everything medical science allows," Dr. Martinez replied gently. "But sometimes love matters more than medicine. Keep talking to him. Let him know he's not alone." So Brady talked. He told Courage about Bruno, about the family waiting for him, about the second chances that life sometimes offered when you least expected them. He shared stories about Ethan, about the climbing adventures they'd planned, about the promises that bound fathers to sons across the boundaries of life and death. And somehow, miraculously, Courage's breathing began to strengthen. The crisis erupted at 4:23 a.m. when the veterinary clinic's alarms began shrieking through the pre-dawn silence. Dr. Martinez had been monitoring the cub's vital signs when her security system detected unauthorized access to the building. Through the reinforced glass doors, Brady could see dark figures moving with military precision through the airport's service corridors. "They found us," Agent Collins said grimly, her hand moving instinctively to the concealed weapon beneath her coordinator jacket. "I should have known they'd be monitoring for any breach of the suitcase." Bruno sensed the danger immediately, positioning himself between the cubs and the entrance while emitting a low, rumbling growl that raised the hair on Brady's arms. The bear's protective instincts had kicked into overdrive, his massive frame coiled with lethal potential. "How many?" Brady asked, his old ranger training reasserting itself despite his arthritis and 65 years. "At least 4, possibly 6, Collins replied, studying the security monitors. "Professional movement patterns. These aren't amateurs." Dr. Martinez continued working frantically to stabilize the cubs even as chaos erupted around them. "I can't move them," she said urgently. "The smallest one is still critical, and any stress could kill him." Through the clinic's windows, Brady watched a black SUV pull up to the service entrance. A woman emerged from the passenger seat, tall, elegant, with silver-streaked hair and the commanding presence of someone accustomed to getting her way. Even from a distance, Brady could see the cold calculation in her movements. "Dr. Rebecca Reynolds," Collins identified, her voice tight with recognition. "She's supposed to be one of the country's leading wildlife conservationists." "Supposed to be?" Brady questioned, though something about the woman's predatory grace reminded him uncomfortably of the poachers he'd encountered during his ranger days. "I've been investigating her foundation for 8 months, Collins admitted, finally dropping her cover. "I'm FBI, Brady, Undercover Wildlife Crimes Unit. Reynolds runs one of the largest trafficking operations in North America, hidden behind a legitimate conservation front." The revelation should have shocked Brady, but somehow it made perfect sense. He'd learned during his ranger years that the most dangerous criminals were often those who appeared most respectable, who used their legitimate positions to mask darker activities. "The cubs," Mrs. Henderson said quietly, her matronly voice cutting through the tension. "What does she want with babies?" "Exotic pet trade," Collins explained grimly. "Bear cubs can sell for $50,000 to $75,000 each on the black market. Adults are worth even more. Private zoos, canned hunting operations, traditional medicine markets in Asia." Brady felt sick. These weren't just animals to Reynolds, they were commodities, living inventory to be bought and sold. The thought of what would happen to Courage, who was still fighting for every breath, filled him with rage. "She's not getting them," he said with quiet finality. The first explosion of sound came from the main entrance. Not breaking glass, but the electronic whir of sophisticated lock-picking equipment. Reynolds had come prepared for a professional extraction, not a smash-and-grab operation. "Dr. Martinez," Reynolds' cultured voice echoed through the clinic as she entered, flanked by 2 men in tactical gear. "I'm disappointed. When you didn't report the cub's recovery immediately, I hoped there was a reasonable explanation." Brady realized with growing horror that Dr. Martinez had been compromised all along. The veterinarian's face was pale with guilt and fear as she faced her apparent employer. "Rebecca, please, Doctor," Martinez said, her hands still working to maintain the cub's IV lines. "They're dying. They need medical care, not transport." "They need to reach their buyers alive," Reynolds corrected coldly. "You've had adequate time to stabilize them. Now they come with me." "Over my dead body," Brady stepped forward, Bruno immediately flanking him with a warning growl that made the tactical team reach for their weapons. Reynolds studied Brady with the calculating gaze of a predator sizing up potential threat. "You must be the airport security guard with the trained bear. I've heard about your partnership." Her smile was arctic. "Touching story, really. Old man and rescued animal finding purpose together. It would be a shame if it ended tragically." The threat was unmistakable, but Brady had faced down armed poachers before, men who valued profit over life and showed no mercy to anyone standing in their way. Fear was an old companion he'd learned to work with rather than against. "These cubs stay here," Brady said steadily. "Whatever operation you're running, it ends tonight." "I don't think you understand the scope of what you're interfering with," Reynolds replied, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been successfully challenged. "My organization provides exotic animals to some very important people, collectors, researchers, private facilities that contribute significantly to wildlife conservation efforts." "By stealing babies from their mothers?" Mrs. Henderson had appeared from the supply closet, her 72-year-old frame trembling with indignation. "By letting children like these suffer in suitcases?" Reynolds' mask slipped slightly at the old woman's moral outrage. "You civilians don't understand the complexities of modern conservation. Sometimes difficult choices must be made for the greater good." "The greater good?" Brady's voice rose with barely controlled fury. "My son died trying to expose people like you. Those federal agents who disappeared, they were getting too close to your operation, weren't they?" For the first time, Reynolds looked genuinely surprised. "Your son?" "Ethan Williams, 16 years old, found dead at the base of a cliff in the Kenai Peninsula 3 years ago." Brady's words came out like bullets. "Ruled an accident, but he'd been trying to document wildlife trafficking in that area. He knew something was wrong." Reynolds' expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect. "The boy with the camera. I remember now. He was persistent. I'll give him that. Managed to photograph several of our operations before he fell." The casual admission of his son's murder hit Brady like a physical blow. His vision tunneled. Arthritis forgotten as pure rage flooded his system. Behind him, Bruno sensed his human's emotional state and responded with a roar that shook the clinic's windows. "You killed him," Brady said, the words barely audible above the bear's threatening display. "I protected my operation," Reynolds corrected without remorse. "Your son was going to cause problems for very important people. His death was unfortunate but necessary." That's when Mrs. Henderson moved. The elderly woman had positioned herself near the emergency alert system while everyone focused on the confrontation. With the decisive action of someone who'd spent decades managing crises, she triggered every alarm in the airport simultaneously. Klaxons wailed, emergency lights strobed, and automated announcements began broadcasting lockdown procedures throughout the facility. Within minutes, airport security, local police, and federal agents would converge on their location. "You clever old bat," Reynolds snarled, her composure finally cracking completely. The tactical team raised their weapons, but Bruno was faster. 3 years of partnership with Brady had taught the bear to read human aggression, and he launched himself at the nearest gunman with terrifying speed. The 180-pound bear struck like a furry missile, driving the man to the ground and sending his weapon skittering across the floor. Chaos erupted. Dr. Martinez threw herself protectively over the cub's incubator while Agent Collins engaged the second gunman in hand-to-hand combat. Mrs. Henderson armed herself with a mop bucket, wielding it like a medieval weapon against anyone who threatened her boys. Brady found himself face-to-face with Reynolds, whose elegant facade had dissolved completely to reveal the cold-blooded killer beneath. She'd drawn a small pistol from her purse, its barrel trained directly on his chest. "You have no idea what you've cost me," she hissed. Years of careful planning, millions in potential revenue, political connections that took decades to cultivate. Good, Brady replied, taking a step closer despite the weapon. I hope I've cost you everything. The gunshot, when it came, echoed through the clinic like thunder. But it wasn't Reynolds who fired. Agent Collins had managed to disarm her opponent and put a bullet into the ceiling as a warning. The psychological effect was immediate, with everyone freezing as the reality of lethal force settled over the scene. FBI! Everyone on the ground now! Collins shouted, her professional authority finally revealed as backup sirens wailed in the distance. Reynolds' expression shifted one final time, from rage to the calculating look of someone planning an escape. But as she raised her weapon toward Brady, Bruno completed his circuit of the room. The bear's massive paw caught her wrist, sending the gun flying while his weight drove her to the floor with bone-crushing finality. In the sudden silence that followed, broken only by approaching sirens and the cub's soft breathing, Brady knelt beside Courage's incubator. The smallest cub had somehow survived the chaos, his tiny eyes now open and focused on the man who'd promised to save him. "It's over, little fighter," Brady whispered, his weathered fingers gently stroking the cub's fur. "You're safe now. We're all safe." The victory lasted exactly 47 minutes before tragedy struck with devastating finality. Despite Agent Collins' assurances that the crisis was over and Reynolds was in federal custody, the stress of the confrontation had pushed Courage's fragile system beyond its breaking point. Dr. Martinez noticed the change first, the subtle shift in the cub's breathing pattern that every veterinarian learns to dread. "Brady," she said quietly, her professional composure cracking for the first time all night. "You need to come here." The words hit him like ice water. Brady had heard that tone before in the Anchorage hospital when the doctors had exhausted every option for Ethan. It was the sound of impending loss, of medical science reaching its limits against forces too powerful to overcome. Courage lay motionless in the incubator, his tiny ribcage barely moving. The monitors showed vital signs that were fading despite every intervention Dr. Martinez had attempted. His brothers, Brady had mentally named them Freedom and Hope, seemed to sense something was wrong, their own breathing becoming agitated as they responded to distress pheromones they couldn't understand. "What can we do?" Brady asked, though he already knew the answer from the pain in Dr. Martinez's eyes. "We've done everything medically possible," she replied, her voice thick with unshed tears. "His organs are shutting down. The trauma of captivity, the stress of transport, the chaos tonight. It was just too much for such a small body." Bruno approached the incubator with heartbreaking gentleness, his massive head lowering until his nose nearly touched the glass. The bear began making soft huffing sounds, almost like he was trying to breathe life back into his dying sibling. It was the most devastating display of animal grief Brady had ever witnessed. Mrs. Henderson appeared at Brady's shoulder, her weathered hand finding his with the comfort of someone who'd buried her own children. "Oh, honey," she whispered, "sometimes love isn't enough to save them, no matter how hard we try." The parallel to Ethan's death was unbearable. Brady found himself transported back to that sterile hospital room, watching his son slip away despite the machines and medications and desperate prayers. He'd been helpless then, just as he was helpless now, watching another innocent life fade while he stood by, powerless to intervene. "Dad," Ethan had whispered in those final moments, his voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Promise me you'll save them. The ones who can't save themselves." Brady had thought his son was delirious, talking about future climbing rescues or park ranger duties. Now, watching Courage struggle for each breath, he understood that Ethan had been talking about this moment, this choice between giving up and finding the strength to keep fighting for the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. "Can I hold him?" Brady asked, his voice breaking on the words. "Doctor." Martinez hesitated, then carefully lifted the dying cub from the incubator. Courage weighed almost nothing, his small body generating barely any warmth as Brady cradled him against his chest. The cub's eyes opened one final time, focusing on Brady's face with what seemed like recognition, like gratitude. "I'm sorry, little fighter," Brady whispered, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "I'm so sorry we couldn't save you." Bruno pressed close, his warm breath ruffling the cub's fur as he made soft vocalizations that sounded almost like lullabies. Even in his grief, the bear understood his role as protector and comforter, offering what solace he could to both his dying sibling and his human partner. The end came quietly, without drama or struggle. One moment Courage was breathing, fighting with everything his tiny body possessed, and the next he was still. The monitors flatlined with electronic finality, but Brady barely heard them over the sound of his own heart breaking. "He's gone," Dr. Martinez confirmed unnecessarily, her professional training warring with maternal instincts she'd never been able to fulfill. Time of death, 5:43 a.m. The clinic fell into profound silence, broken only by the soft whimpering of the surviving cubs and Bruno's mournful keen. Mrs. Henderson began crying openly, her hands pressed to her mouth as if she could somehow hold back the tide of grief threatening to overwhelm them all. Brady continued holding Courage's small body, unwilling to let go of the life he'd failed to save. The weight of accumulated loss, Ethan, the missing federal agents, now this innocent cub, settled on his shoulders like a crushing burden. At 65, he felt every year of his age, every missed opportunity, every promise he'd been unable to keep. "This is on me," he said finally, his voice hollow with self-recrimination. "If I'd pushed harder to open that suitcase earlier, if I'd broken protocol sooner." "No." Agent Collins' voice cut through his spiral of guilt with FBI authority. "This is on Reynolds and every person in her network who values profit over life. You didn't kill this cub, Brady. You gave him the only chance he had." But the logic couldn't penetrate the wall of grief surrounding Brady's heart. He'd lost his son to these monsters, and now he'd lost the chance to save an innocent life that had been placed in his care. The symmetry was cruel beyond description. "Doctor." Martinez gently took Courage's body, wrapping him in a soft blue blanket with the reverence reserved for the very young. "We'll make sure he's treated with dignity," she promised. "There will be a proper burial, a memorial service. His life mattered." Outside the clinic windows, dawn was breaking over Denver International Airport. The crisis was over, the criminals were in custody, and 2 bear cubs had been saved from a fate worse than death. By any objective measure, the night had been a victory. So why did Brady feel like he'd lost everything that mattered? Bruno seemed to understand his human's devastation, pressing his massive bulk against Brady's legs in an offer of comfort and support. The bear had lost a sibling, but he still had his chosen family, still had purpose and love and the promise of tomorrow. As the morning sun streamed through the clinic windows, casting long shadows across the floor where they'd fought for lives both lost and saved, Brady began to understand that grief and hope weren't opposites. They were partners in the long dance of healing, neither possible without the other. The revelation came 3 days after Courage's death, delivered by Agent Collins in the form of a manila folder that would shatter everything Brady thought he knew about his son's final moments. They sat in the airport's small memorial chapel, a quiet space where Brady had been spending his off hours since the tragedy, trying to make sense of loss that seemed to compound with every passing year. "Brady, I need you to see something," Collins said, her FBI credentials now openly displayed as she spread photographs across the wooden pew between them. These were recovered from Reynolds' private files during the federal raid on her compound. The first photograph showed a teenage boy with Brady's distinctive jawline and stubborn cowlick crouched behind a fallen log with a digital camera raised to his eye. Even from the distance and poor lighting, Brady recognized his son immediately. This was Ethan, very much alive, on what was supposed to be their climbing expedition 3 years ago. "He didn't fall accidentally," Collins said gently. "Your son was conducting surveillance on Reynolds' operation. These photos prove he'd been tracking the trafficking ring for weeks before his death." Brady's hands trembled as he examined image after image of his son documenting the criminal enterprise with the methodical precision of a trained investigator. Ethan had photographed men loading animal cages onto private aircraft, captured license plates and faces, even managed to record GPS coordinates of the trafficking sites. "Why didn't he tell me?" Brady whispered, his voice breaking with the weight of revelation. "Because he knew you'd try to stop him," Collins replied, producing a handwritten letter bearing Ethan's careful script. "He left this with a climbing buddy with instructions to deliver it only if something happened to him." Brady's vision blurred as he read his son's final words. "Dad, if you're reading this, then something went wrong and I didn't make it back from Alaska. I know you're going to blame yourself, but please don't. I made this choice because it was the right thing to do, and because you taught me that protecting those who can't protect themselves is what makes us human. I've been investigating wildlife trafficking in the Kenai Peninsula for 6 months. The operation is bigger than anyone realizes, involving people with serious political connections. I have evidence, photos, documents, recordings, hidden in our old camping gear from when I was 12. Look for the red stuff sack with the bear patch Mom sewed on. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd want to come with me, and I couldn't risk losing you too. But if something happens to me, please finish what I started." "The animals can't speak for themselves, Dad. They need someone to be their voice. I'm not afraid of dying if it means saving lives. You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. I learned that from watching you all those years as a park ranger. Tell Bruno I said goodbye when you find him. I know you will. You always save the ones that need saving most. I love you, Dad. Take care of each other. Ethan." The letter fell from Brady's nerveless fingers as the full magnitude of his son's sacrifice became clear. Ethan hadn't been a victim of random tragedy. He'd been a hero who'd given his life to expose the very criminals they'd just defeated. His death had meaning, purpose, a legacy that had ultimately led to saving the cubs and dismantling Reynolds' empire. "There's more," Collins said softly, producing a second folder. "Dr. Martinez wasn't working for Reynolds willingly. Her younger sister was kidnapped 8 years ago, taken by the same trafficking network that killed your son. Reynolds has been using her as leverage ever since, forcing Dr. Martinez to provide veterinary cover for the operation." The revelation reframed everything Brady thought he knew about the veterinarian who'd tried so desperately to save Courage. She hadn't been a collaborator. She'd been another victim trapped in an impossible situation with no good choices. "Where's her sister now?" Brady asked. "Alive. Rescued during the compound raid along with 14 other trafficking victims." Collins's expression softened with genuine satisfaction. "She's been reunited with Dr. Martinez. The psychological damage will take years to heal, but she's safe now." As Brady absorbed this information, the chapel door opened to admit Mrs. Henderson, who'd become something of a grandmother figure to everyone involved in the crisis. She carried a thermos of coffee and wore the determined expression of someone who'd made an important decision. "Brady, honey, I've been doing some thinking," she said, settling beside him with the comfortable authority of someone who'd earned the right to speak her mind. "About that land your son mentioned in his letter, the camping gear with evidence." Brady looked up, surprised. "You read the letter?" Agent Collins thought I should know, given how invested I've become in this whole mess. Mrs. Henderson's eyes twinkled with mischief. Turns out my late husband Harold owned property adjacent to where your boy was investigating. Mineral rights, timber claims, the whole 9 yards. Been in legal limbo since he passed, but I think it's time to put it to good use. What are you suggesting? Collins asked, though her expression suggested she already knew. Wildlife sanctuary, Mrs. Henderson announced with satisfaction. Specifically for trafficked animals that need rehabilitation. Brady's got the expertise, doctor. Martinez has the medical knowledge, and I've got the land and more money than I know what to do with since Harold's investments paid off. The proposal hit Brady like lightning. A way to honor Ethan's memory while continuing the work that had cost his son his life. A place where animals like Freedom and Hope could recover and eventually be released back to the wild, where others could find the second chances that circumstances had denied courage. The Harold and Ethan Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary, Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice thick with emotion, has a nice ring to it, don't you think? But it was Collins's next revelation that provided the final piece of the puzzle. Brady, there's something else you need to know about Bruno. We ran DNA tests on all the cubs, trying to establish their origins for the federal case. She produced a laboratory report with clinical precision. Bruno isn't just related to the cubs, he's their older brother. Same mother, same trafficking operation. The timing suggests he was separated from his family about 3.5 years ago, right around the time you found him. The implication was staggering. Bruno hadn't just recognized the cubs, he'd been trying to save his own siblings. The bear's desperate behavior at the airport, his protective instincts, his heartbroken mourning for courage, all of it took on new meaning in light of biological connection. He knew, Brady said with wonder. Somehow he knew they were family. Animals have senses we don't fully understand, Collins agreed. Scent, memory, emotional recognition, genetic bonds that transcend separation. Bruno was trying to tell you from the beginning that these weren't just any cubs, they were his brothers and sister. As the revelations settled into Brady's consciousness, he felt something he hadn't experienced since Ethan's death, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere survival. His son had died fighting for justice. Bruno had found his family, and now they had the opportunity to create something lasting from the ashes of tragedy. The sanctuary, Brady said slowly, testing the words. It could work. A place where trafficked animals can heal, where people can learn about conservation, where families like Bruno's don't have to be separated by human greed. Mrs. Henderson beamed with maternal pride. That's my boy. Harold always said the best way to honor the dead is to live in a way that makes their sacrifice worthwhile. Outside the chapel windows, Brady could see Bruno playing with Freedom and Hope in the temporary enclosure Martinez had constructed in the airport's maintenance area. The surviving cubs were thriving under their brother's protection, their playful antics a testament to the resilience of life even after trauma. Agent Collins gathered her files with professional efficiency. The federal case against Reynolds' network is solid. Her organization was responsible for trafficking over 200 endangered animals in the past 5 years alone. Thanks to Ethan's evidence and what we recovered during the raid, we'll be able to prosecute the entire chain of command. What about the political connections? Brady asked. The people who protected her operation? Collins's smile was sharp with anticipation. Let's just say several prominent figures are about to have very difficult conversations with federal investigators. Money talks, but justice talks louder when you have the evidence to back it up. As they prepared to leave the chapel, Brady took one last look at Ethan's letter, memorizing words that would guide the rest of his life. His son had died believing in something larger than himself, trusting that his father would carry on the fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. The promise had been kept. Now, it was time to build something lasting from that foundation of love and sacrifice. 6 months later, Brady Williams stood at the entrance of the Harold and Ethan Memorial Wildlife Sanctuary, watching as the morning sun painted the Colorado mountains in shades of gold and amber. The 200-acre facility nestled in the foothills west of Denver had transformed from Mrs. Henderson's late husband's timber claim into something neither man could have imagined, a beacon of hope for animals rescued from humanity's darkest impulses. The sound of approaching footsteps on gravel announced Dr. Martinez's arrival for their daily rounds. She looked different now. The haunted expression that had shadowed her eyes during the trafficking crisis had been replaced by something approaching peace. Her sister Elena walked beside her, still fragile but healing, having found her own purpose working with the sanctuary's education programs. "The state inspection team arrives this afternoon," Dr. Martinez reported, consulting her tablet with professional satisfaction. "If we pass, and I'm confident we will receive full accreditation as a wildlife rehabilitation facility." Brady nodded, his attention focused on the large enclosure where Freedom and Hope were engaging in their morning play routine under Bruno's watchful supervision. At nearly a year old, the cubs had grown into healthy young bears, their traumatic beginning evident only in their unusually strong bond with their older brother. The sight never failed to fill Brady with wonder at life's capacity for healing. "The federal grant came through," Mrs. Henderson announced, appearing from the visitor center with her characteristic enthusiasm. At 73, she'd thrown herself into sanctuary management with the energy of someone half her age, organizing fundraisers, coordinating volunteer programs, and generally ensuring that everyone was properly fed and cared for. $2.5 million over 5 years for the Trafficking Victim Rehabilitation Program. The financial security meant they could expand their mission beyond the 3 bears who'd started it all. Already, the sanctuary housed 12 other animals rescued from various trafficking operations: 2 mountain lions, a family of wolves, 3 red foxes, and several smaller mammals who required specialized care before they could be released back to the wild. Brady's morning ritual always included a visit to Courage's Memorial Garden, located on a hillside overlooking the main enclosures. The small bronze plaque, surrounded by native wildflowers, read simply, "Courage, he fought until the end." Visitors often left flowers or notes, touched by the story of the smallest cub whose death had galvanized public support for anti-trafficking efforts. "Dad would be proud," Brady said quietly, addressing both the memorial and the spirit of his son, whose investigation had made everything possible. "You both would." The sound of vehicle engines interrupted his meditation. Agent Collins emerged from a federal SUV, her FBI credentials now openly displayed as she'd been assigned as the Bureau's liaison to the sanctuary's law enforcement training programs. Behind her, a news van disgorged reporters and camera equipment. The media attention had never fully subsided, with Courage's story becoming a symbol for wildlife protection efforts nationwide. "Big day," Collins said, joining Brady at the memorial. "The congressional hearing on strengthening anti-trafficking laws starts tomorrow. Your testimony is going to carry serious weight with the committee." Brady felt the familiar flutter of nervousness that accompanied public speaking. At 66, he'd become an unlikely spokesperson for wildlife protection, his story of loss and redemption resonating with audiences across the country. The book he'd written, A Bear's Promise, One Father's Journey from Grief to Hope, had become a bestseller, with all proceeds funding the sanctuary's operations. "I just tell Ethan's story," Brady replied. "And Courage's. People need to understand what's at stake." The morning's first tour group was arriving, 30 school children from Denver, wide-eyed with excitement at the prospect of meeting Bruno and learning about wildlife conservation. Education had become central to the sanctuary's mission, with programs designed to create the next generation of wildlife protectors. Bruno seemed to sense the approaching children, rising from his supervisory position to greet the visitors with the gentle dignity that had made him famous. The bear's transformation from traumatized rescue to confident ambassador never ceased to amaze Brady. In saving others, Bruno had found his own healing. Mr. Williams, a 9-year-old girl with pigtails, waved enthusiastically from the tour group. "Is it true that Bruno can smell feelings?" Brady smiled, remembering when such questions would have seemed impossible to answer. "Bears have incredible noses," he replied. "Bruno can detect things we can't even imagine, including when someone is sad or scared or happy. He's very good at knowing when people need comfort." As if demonstrating this ability, Bruno approached the fence separating him from the children and sat in his trained greeting position, alert but relaxed, making himself available for interaction while respecting boundaries. The children's delighted squeals brought freedom and hope bounding over to investigate, their playful energy infectious. Dr. Martinez took over the educational portion of the tour, explaining bear behavior and habitat needs, while Elena distributed informational packets about wildlife trafficking prevention. The seamless coordination between staff members reflected months of practice and genuine passion for their work. Mrs. Henderson appeared with her inevitable thermos of coffee and homemade cookies, having appointed herself the sanctuary's unofficial grandmother. "Brady, honey, there's someone here to see you. Says it's about Ethan." Brady's heart skipped as he followed her back to the visitor center, where a woman in her 40s waited nervously near the reception desk. She had kind eyes and carried herself with the careful posture of someone who'd experienced significant trauma. "Mr. Williams, I'm Sarah Caldwell. I was held by Reynolds' organization for 2 years. Her voice carried the slight tremor common among trafficking survivors. "I wanted to thank you and to tell you something about your son." Brady's breath caught. Even after all these months, mentions of Ethan still had the power to stop him in his tracks. "Please sit down. Can I get you something to drink?" Sarah accepted coffee with grateful hands, taking a moment to compose herself before speaking. "Ethan saved my life, Mr. Williams. I was 19 when they took me, working as a research assistant in Alaska. Your son found where they were keeping me and 2 other girls. He gave us food, water, hope." The words hit Brady like a physical blow. "You knew Ethan?" "For 3 days, he was planning our escape when they caught him." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "He made us promise that if anything happened to him, we'd survive. We'd testify. We'd make sure his work mattered." Brady reached across the table to grasp her hands, his own eyes burning with unshed tears. "You survived. You're here. His work did matter. He talked about you constantly," Sarah continued. "About Bruno. He knew you'd find a bear cub somehow. Don't ask me how. He said you were the kind of man who collected broken things and made them whole again. He was so proud to be your son." The conversation continued for an hour, Sarah sharing memories of Ethan's final days that painted a picture of a young man who'd faced impossible circumstances with courage and compassion. She'd spent 3 years in therapy after her rescue, slowly rebuilding her life while carrying the memory of the teenager who'd given his life trying to save her. "I work with victim advocacy groups now," Sarah explained as their meeting concluded, "helping other survivors navigate the legal system and recovery process. In a way, I'm continuing Ethan's work." As Sarah departed, Brady felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with Ethan's investigation and death had finally closed with the testimony of someone his son had died trying to save. The sacrifice had meaning, purpose, a legacy that extended far beyond the sanctuary's boundaries. The afternoon brought the state inspection team, whose thorough examination of facilities and procedures would determine the sanctuary's official accreditation. Brady watched with pride as his small team demonstrated their expertise, from Dr. Martinez's medical protocols to Mrs. Henderson's meticulous record-keeping to the specialized enclosures designed with both animal welfare and public education in mind. As evening approached, Brady made his final rounds of the day, checking on each animal under their care. The wolves were settling into their twilight hunting routine, the mountain lions stretching on their elevated platforms, the foxes engaging in the playful wrestling that characterized their species. But it was the bear enclosure that drew his longest attention. Bruno lay peacefully beside Freedom and Hope, the three siblings finally reunited in safety and comfort. The sight represented everything the sanctuary stood for: healing, hope, and the possibility of redemption even after the darkest trauma. Agent Collins joined him at the fence, her usual professional demeanor softened by the evening light. The Congressional Committee voted this afternoon: enhanced penalties for wildlife trafficking, mandatory minimum sentences, and federal funding for rehabilitation facilities like this one. Ethan's evidence was instrumental in building the case. "He'd be happy," Brady said simply. "He always believed in doing the right thing, even when it was hard." As stars began appearing in the Colorado sky, Brady reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. Grief had been transformed into purpose, loss had become legacy, and a broken old man and his rescued bear had become part of something larger than themselves. Mrs. Henderson appeared with evening coffee, Elena at her side with a plate of homemade pie. "Doctor." Martinez emerged from the medical building, her day's work complete. Agent Collins checked her phone one final time before settling into a comfortable chair on the visitor center's porch. They sat together in companionable silence, this unlikely family bound together by shared trauma and common purpose. Above them, the same stars that had witnessed Ethan's courage and courage's struggle now blessed their continued work with celestial approval. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals to heal, new stories to tell. But tonight, Brady Williams was exactly where he belonged, surrounded by chosen family, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves, keeping the promise he'd made to his son and a dying bear cub. The good Lord never gave anyone more than they could handle, and he always provided the help needed to carry on. At 65, Brady Williams discovered something profound. It's never too late to find your purpose, and sometimes the family you choose matters more than the one you were born into. When grief threatened to consume him after losing his son Ethan, an orphaned bear cub named Bruno became his lifeline. Proof that healing happens when broken souls save each other. Their unlikely partnership at Denver International Airport led to exposing a wildlife trafficking ring and saving innocent lives, transforming personal tragedy into a legacy of hope. Brady's story reminds us that our golden years aren't about slowing down. They're about channeling a lifetime of wisdom into something meaningful. Whether it's protecting animals, mentoring young people, or simply being the neighbor who notices when someone needs help, we seniors have unique power to make a difference. Our experience with loss gives us deeper empathy. Our freedom from career pressures allows us to follow our hearts. Our understanding that time is precious motivates us to act on what truly matters. Like Brady discovered, sometimes our greatest contribution comes after we think our best years are behind us. Every setback can become a setup for something beautiful. Discussion questions. What unexpected second chapter have you discovered in your retirement years, and how has it brought you joy? Have you ever found healing by helping others through similar struggles you've faced? Please share your own stories of finding new purpose after loss or retirement in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone who needs hope today.